This unauthorized memorial violates community standards and must be removed immediately before property values suffer permanent damage. I don't care if your daddy was some war hero. This isn't Arlington Cemetery, it's a planned community. That's what Kenneth Bradshaw screamed at me while directing his demolition crew to destroy my father's Purple Heart Memorial Garden. His pink dress shirt stretched tight across his bloated gut, black dress pants riding up as he gestured wildly with his clipboard. The smell of his cheap cologne mixed with diesel exhaust, and the heartbreaking sound of my father's bronze memorial plaque being ripped from the ground filled the morning air, as this suburban dictator stood there absolutely convinced he just eliminated an eyesore that threatened his precious neighborhood aesthetics. I'm General William Harrison, and for 32 years I've served this nation, rising through the ranks to become a three-star general commanding the Army's Personnel Command, overseeing the careers of every officer and enlisted soldier in the United States Army. But standing there in my red and black checkered flannel shirt, watching this entitled coward desecrate my father's memory, I felt the cold satisfaction of knowing exactly how this would end. What Kenneth didn't know was that his own son, Captain Bradley Bradshaw, served under my direct command at Fort Carson, and in exactly 16 months, he'd be facing a military tribunal for conduct unbecoming an officer, conspiracy to violate federal veterans protection laws, and complicity in desecrating a military memorial. And I'd be the commanding general who'd destroy his military career, strip his commission, and ensure he faced federal criminal charges for participating in his father's war crimes against American veterans. What would you do if some HOA tyrant demolished your war hero father's memorial garden? Where are you watching from? Drop a flag emoji and tell me your state, because this story will show you exactly how to destroy anti-veteran corruption using military justice and 32 years of command authority. My name is William Harrison, and 18 months ago I thought buying property in Mountain Vista Estates would provide the perfect way to honor my father's memory while enjoying a peaceful retirement after 3 decades of military service. After commanding troops in Afghanistan, overseeing personnel decisions for 180,000 soldiers, and serving as Deputy Inspector General of the Army, I was looking forward to quiet mornings tending the memorial garden I'd created for Master Sergeant Robert Harrison, who'd earned 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star before losing his battle with Agent Orange complications in 2019. Dad had served 3 tours in Vietnam, survived the Tet Offensive, and spent his final years volunteering at the VA hospital, helping younger veterans navigate the system he'd fought to improve. When he passed, I used my retirement savings to purchase a beautiful 2-acre property in Mountain Vista Estates, a quiet subdivision outside Colorado Springs where military families often settled after retirement. The location offered easy access to Fort Carson, stunning mountain views, and what seemed like a supportive community that appreciated military service and sacrifice. The memorial garden I created for Dad was a labor of love that took 8 months to complete. Working with landscape architects and veteran memorial specialists, I designed a peaceful space featuring native Colorado plants, a regulation flagpole flying the American flag and POWMTA banner, and a bronze memorial plaque engraved with Dad's service record and his favorite saying, "Freedom isn't free, but it's worth every sacrifice." The garden included hand-carved wooden benches where other veterans could sit and reflect, a small fountain that provided soothing water sounds, and carefully chosen wildflowers that bloomed from spring through fall in Dad's favorite colors. The memorial was professionally designed, properly permitted through county authorities, and located entirely on my property within all required setbacks. I'd researched every regulation, obtained appropriate approvals from the HOA's architectural committee, and even consulted with the local VFW post to ensure the memorial met military protocol standards. The garden became a gathering place for neighborhood veterans and their families, hosting informal Memorial Day and Veterans Day ceremonies that brought the community together in honoring those who'd served our nation. For the first year, Mountain Vista Estates felt like the perfect retirement community. Neighbors appreciated the memorial garden, often stopping to read Dad's plaque and share their own military stories or family histories of service. Children would ask respectful questions about the medals displayed in the memorial case, and their parents used the opportunity to teach about military service, sacrifice, and the true cost of freedom. The Homeowners Association seemed reasonable, focused on maintaining common areas and organizing community events rather than micromanaging residents' personal choices or patriotic displays. The trouble started when Kenneth Bradshaw moved into the largest house on Heritage Drive in March 2022. At 55, Kenneth had the soft appearance of someone who'd spent decades avoiding any form of service while profiting from others' sacrifices through his defense contracting business. He'd built his wealth selling overpriced equipment to military bases while never wearing a uniform himself, never understanding the brotherhood and sacrifice that defines military service. His wife Margaret seemed pleasant during our brief interactions, but she rarely spoke when Kenneth dominated conversations with his opinions about military spending, veteran benefits, and what he called excessive patriotic displays in civilian communities. Kenneth immediately positioned himself as a community improvement advocate, attending every HOA meeting with typed complaints about declining property values and inappropriate residential modifications. He had strong opinions about flag displays, memorial decorations, and what he termed military-themed landscaping that allegedly violated community aesthetic standards. Within 6 months, Kenneth had maneuvered himself onto the HOA board by promising to restore property values through enhanced enforcement of architectural guidelines and eliminate non-conforming elements that detract from our exclusive community image. The irony wasn't lost on me that Kenneth's defense contracting wealth came from military spending, yet he seemed personally offended by any visible reminder of military service in his neighborhood. His first target was Mrs. Rodriguez, whose husband had served in Iraq, over her small garden flag display honoring deployed troops. Then he went after the Johnsons for their son's Eagle Scout project, honoring local veterans with a small memorial bench. Each complaint followed the same pattern: claims about property values, references to architectural standards, and demands for immediate removal of military-related displays. My memorial garden became Kenneth's obsession during his morning patrol routine in his white HOA golf cart emblazoned with a fake enforcement logo. He'd drive slowly past my property, stopping to photograph the memorial from multiple angles, measure distances to property lines with an actual ruler, and document what he called violations of community aesthetic standards. His pink dress shirt and black dress pants became his daily uniform as he appointed himself the neighborhood's anti-military enforcement officer, timing my activities, documenting my visitors, and building a case against what he termed inappropriate militarization of residential property. The harassment escalated when Kenneth began filing complaints with county officials about my memorial garden, claiming the flagpole violated height restrictions despite my having proper permits, alleging the memorial plaque constituted commercial signage when it clearly honored a deceased veteran, and insisting the bronze elements created safety hazards for children despite their professional installation. Each complaint required official investigation, forcing me to take time away from my consulting work to meet with inspectors, provide documentation, and defend a memorial that had been properly permitted and legally constructed according to all applicable codes. Kenneth's strategy became clear when he offered to help me relocate the memorial to a more appropriate location, like the county veterans cemetery, suggesting that my father's memorial didn't belong in a residential neighborhood where normal families lived. His implication that military families weren't normal, that veteran memorials were somehow inappropriate in civilian communities, revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of both property rights and the sacrifices made by those who serve. When I politely declined his offer and explained that the memorial would remain on my property as a lasting tribute to my father's service, Kenneth's demeanor shifted from fake concern to open hostility. The breaking point came during Memorial Day weekend, when Kenneth organized what he called an architectural compliance review of my property. Without permission or legal authority, he led a group of HOA board members onto my land, photographing my memorial garden, measuring the flagpole height with surveying equipment, and documenting what they claimed were violations of community standards. When I confronted them about trespassing on military memorial grounds, Kenneth claimed they were exercising HOA oversight responsibilities and protecting property values from inappropriate displays that don't belong in civilized neighborhoods. That evening, as I sat in my father's memorial garden watching the sunset paint the Rocky Mountains in shades of gold and purple, listening to the gentle sound of the fountain and breathing in the scent of blooming wildflowers, I realized that Kenneth had made a fundamental miscalculation. He'd assumed I was just another veteran who could be intimidated through bureaucratic harassment and legal threats. What he didn't know was that I commanded 15,000 soldiers, including his own son, and had the authority to destroy military careers for conduct unbecoming an officer and bringing discredit upon the armed forces. Kenneth's final mistake was underestimating his opponent, while simultaneously providing me with evidence of systematic discrimination against military families. He thought he was bullying some retired veteran who'd built an inappropriate memorial in his precious subdivision. What he'd actually done was declare war on a 3-star general who specialized in military justice, personnel management, and ensuring that military families received the respect and protection they deserved under both military and federal law. The war was about to begin, and Kenneth had no idea that his own son's military career would become collateral damage in his father's anti-veteran crusade. Some battles are worth fighting regardless of the cost, and desecrating my father's memory was the one fight Kenneth should never have started. The memorial garden still held the scent of Dad's favorite wildflowers, but now it also carried the promise of justice, swift and thorough, delivered by someone with exactly the right authority to ensure that military families would never again face harassment in Mountain Vista Estates. Kenneth's first official assault came on a humid Tuesday morning, when I found him standing beside my father's memorial garden with his clipboard, pink dress shirt, already showing sweat stains, as he photographed the bronze plaque from multiple angles while speaking into a digital recorder. The smell of his cologne mixed with fresh mulch, and the lingering scent of Memorial Day flowers as he scribbled notes with the intensity of someone documenting war crimes. "Morning, General Harrison," he called out with fake friendliness, his voice carrying across the quiet neighborhood. "Just conducting the quarterly architectural compliance review. Your memorial display appears to violate several recently updated community guidelines." The violation notice he handed me was professionally printed on Mountain Vista Estates HOA letterhead, complete with legal citations and a 14-day deadline for compliance. The document was a masterpiece of bureaucratic intimidation, citing architectural standards, safety regulations, and community aesthetic requirements that supposedly applied to my memorial garden despite my having obtained all required permits before construction. Kenneth had done his homework, researching every possible angle to create the appearance of legitimate authority while systematically targeting military families throughout the neighborhood. The violations ranged from excessive patriotic symbolism to unauthorized memorial signage, to what he termed incompatible landscaping elements that allegedly violated recently amended community standards. Each violation carried fines ranging from $200 to $1,000, with daily accumulation until compliance was achieved. The total potential penalties exceeded $8,500, obviously calculated to force either immediate compliance or memorial removal. Kenneth had essentially put a price tag on my father's sacrifice, treating his Purple Heart Service record like a zoning violation that could be eliminated through financial pressure. The genius of Kenneth's strategy was its systematic nature. He'd identified every military family in Mountain Vista Estates and was methodically targeting their patriotic displays through fabricated HOA violations that appeared legitimate to casual observers. Mrs. Rodriguez received citations for her garden flags honoring her deployed husband, with Kenneth claiming they violated temporary decoration time limits that didn't exist in the original covenants. The Thompson family got fined for their son's Eagle Scout Project memorial bench, allegedly because it constituted an unauthorized structure despite having received architectural amity approval. Even elderly Mr. Patterson, a Korean War veteran, was cited for flying his POWMIA flag alongside the American flag on his front porch, with Kenneth claiming dual flag displays violated flag protocol standards. The harassment campaign expanded throughout June as Kenneth recruited other HOA board members to join his anti-military enforcement operation. Gerald Morrison, a retired insurance executive who'd never served, began photographing military-themed decorations and documenting license plates of vehicles with veteran bumper stickers or military base decals. Sandra Phillips, Kenneth's business partner's wife, conducted what she called aesthetic assessments of military families' properties, claiming to document violations that threatened community property values and the exclusive residential character that attracted high-end buyers to Mountain Vista Estates. The coordinated nature of their activities revealed this wasn't random neighbor harassment, but an organized campaign to eliminate military presence from the neighborhood. Kenneth had created a systematic process for identifying military families through base decals, veteran license plates, and patriotic decorations, then documenting their displays and filing complaints designed to force removal of anything that reminded the community of military service and sacrifice. The pattern was so obvious that any military intelligence officer would have recognized it as a textbook discrimination campaign. My military training had taught me to recognize organized harassment operations, and Kenneth's activities displayed all the hallmarks of systematic discrimination with clear command structure and coordinated execution. The participants had assigned roles, followed documented procedures, and maintained detailed records of their activities. They'd established Kenneth as the operational commander, created false justifications for their actions through selective interpretation of HOA covenants, and coordinated their harassment to maximize psychological pressure on military families while maintaining plausible deniability. The escalation continued when Kenneth began filing complaints with federal agencies about my memorial garden, demonstrating either remarkable ignorance of federal law or criminal intent to file false reports. The Department of Veterans Affairs received reports about inappropriate use of military symbolism that allegedly violated federal veterans' memorial regulations that actually protected such displays. The Army Corps of Engineers got detailed complaints about my flagpole supposedly interfering with flight patterns near Fort Carson, despite the flagpole being standard residential height and nowhere near any flight path. The EPA was told my memorial fountain violated water usage restrictions during drought conditions, when Colorado had no such restrictions and my fountain used recirculated water. Each federal complaint triggered official investigations, forcing me to take time away from my consulting work and veteran advocacy activities to meet with inspectors and provide documentation proving Kenneth's allegations were false. The irony was devastating. While I was helping other veterans navigate military bureaucracy and fighting for improved veteran services, some civilian coward was weaponizing federal agencies to harass me for honoring my father's military service. The pattern revealed Kenneth's strategy: overwhelm military families with bureaucratic pressure from multiple directions until they either complied with his demands or moved away from his precious neighborhood. Kenneth had essentially weaponized the government inspection process, turning public agencies into unwitting accomplices in his anti-military discrimination campaign. The psychological warfare intensified when Kenneth began organizing community standards meetings to discuss what he called inappropriate militarization of residential neighborhoods. These gatherings, held in the community center, featured PowerPoint presentations about declining property values, safety concerns, and aesthetic violations allegedly caused by excessive military displays in civilian communities. Kenneth positioned himself as the community protector, fighting to preserve their investment against military families who refused to maintain appropriate civilian standards. The meetings were carefully orchestrated propaganda sessions designed to build resident support for aggressive action against military memorials and patriotic displays. Kenneth's manipulation of his neighbors was masterful in its cynicism, exploiting their financial anxieties about property values while fostering resentment against the very people who'd served to protect their freedom and way of life. By framing military memorials as threats to their suburban lifestyle, Kenneth transformed ordinary residents into willing participants in his discrimination campaign. They began filing their own complaints, adding their voices to demands for official action, and creating the appearance of widespread community concern about military families. The financial pressure escalated when Kenneth's HOA began assessing what they called aesthetic impact fees against properties with military-themed decorations, claiming these fees were authorized by community standards and property value protection clauses in the covenants. These fees, ranging from $500 to $2,000 per violation, were designed to compensate the neighborhood for aesthetic damage caused by military displays. The assessments against my memorial garden totaled $3,200 and came with legal threats about property liens and forced removal if payment wasn't received within 30 days. Kenneth had essentially created a protection racket, demanding payment to allow military families to honor their service while threatening escalation if his demands weren't met. The breaking point came when Kenneth filed a formal complaint, with the county claiming my memorial garden violated federal regulations governing military memorials on private property. His evidence included photographs of what he claimed were unauthorized military symbols, documentation of alleged federal violations, and testimony from neighbors about the memorial's inappropriate impact on community standards. Kenneth was attempting to use federal regulations to literally destroy my father's memorial through legal technicalities and false documentation. The federal complaint revealed Kenneth's ultimate strategy. He'd been systematically building a case to force removal of all military memorials and patriotic displays from the neighborhood through what appeared to be legitimate legal processes. What Kenneth didn't realize was that filing false federal complaints about military memorials constitutes a federal crime under veterans' protection statutes. More importantly, his systematic harassment of military families violated federal civil rights laws that carry serious criminal penalties. Kenneth had just escalated from neighborhood harassment into federal criminal territory, creating evidence of anti-military discrimination that would trigger military justice investigations. The most shocking discovery came when I learned about Kenneth's family connection to my command structure. His son, Captain Bradley Bradshaw, served as the moment Kenneth filed that fraudulent federal complaint about my father's memorial. He crossed the line from harassment into federal criminal territory, and my 32 years of military command experience kicked into full investigative mode. I spent the following weekend in my home office, surrounded by military regulations, federal statutes, and the comprehensive personnel files I could access through my position as commanding general, building what prosecutors would later call the most thorough anti-military discrimination case in Colorado history. The smell of coffee and determination filled the room as I methodically documented every aspect of Kenneth's systematic campaign against military families. What Kenneth didn't know was that General William Harrison had written the military family protection protocols he was violating, including contributing to the landmark Military Family Protection Act that made exactly his type of harassment a federal felony with mandatory minimum sentences. My investigation began with Kenneth's federal complaint itself, and the document was a masterpiece of criminal stupidity. He'd claimed my memorial violated federal regulations that actually protected military memorials on private property, cited statutes that explicitly exempted veteran memorials from HOA jurisdiction, and sworn under oath to facts that were demonstrably false according to my own documentation. The federal implications became clear when I traced Kenneth's financing sources for his anti-military harassment campaign through my contacts in military finance and procurement oversight. The Mountain Vista Estates HOA was funded through resident dues, but Kenneth had been diverting those funds to pay for private investigators, legal fees, and what he called community protection activities without board approval or resident knowledge. The financial records, obtained through my security clearance and military intelligence networks, revealed systematic embezzlement of HOA funds to finance his personal crusade against military families. When HOA embezzlement involves federal agencies and crosses state lines through electronic transfers, it triggers racketeering jurisdiction under the RICO Act, transforming neighborhood harassment into organized crime. My analysis of Kenneth's complaint pattern revealed something even more damaging than simple discrimination. He'd been filing false reports with federal agencies, including the VA, the Department of Defense, and Homeland Security, claiming military families violated federal regulations through their memorial displays and patriotic decorations. Each false federal report constituted mail fraud and wire fraud, both federal felonies carrying up to 20 years in prison. Kenneth had essentially been committing federal crimes weekly for over 8 months, creating a paper trail that military prosecutors would later describe as the most well-documented anti-military conspiracy in Western Command history. The conspiracy extended beyond Kenneth to include other HOA board members who'd participated in the harassment campaign, but the most shocking discovery was the involvement of his own son. Captain Bradley Bradshaw, serving under my direct command at Fort Carson, had been providing his father with confidential information about military families in the area. Using his access to personnel records, deployment schedules, and family emergency contacts, Bradley had helped his father identify targets for harassment while they were most vulnerable. When soldiers deployed overseas, Kenneth would escalate his harassment of their families, knowing they couldn't respond effectively while serving in combat zones and protecting American interests abroad. The military justice implications were staggering. Captain Bradshaw had violated his oath of office, breached military confidentiality regulations, and participated in systematic harassment of fellow service members and their families. Under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, these actions constituted conduct unbecoming an officer, conspiracy to violate federal civil rights laws, and complicity in anti-military discrimination. The penalties included court-martial, dismissal from service with loss of all benefits, and federal criminal charges that could result in decades in prison. My investigation revealed the true scope of Kenneth's anti-military network when I discovered his correspondence with similar HOA operations in military communities across 6 western states. Through military intelligence channels and my network of commanding officers at bases throughout the region, I learned that Kenneth had been sharing tactics, coordinating harassment strategies, and providing training materials for targeting military families through bureaucratic intimidation disguised as legitimate community governance. Kenneth wasn't just a local HOA tyrant. He was a regional coordinator in a criminal organization that specialized in driving military families from civilian communities through systematic harassment and legal intimidation. The evidence compilation revealed systematic discrimination that extended far beyond my memorial garden to include targeting of military families based on deployment status, service-connected disability ratings, and veteran benefits that Kenneth viewed as unfair advantages in the housing market. The money trail uncovered through my military finance contacts revealed Kenneth's operation was more sophisticated than typical neighborhood harassment. He'd established multiple LLCs to hide his activities, created false documentation to support his claims, and coordinated with anti-military activists who were receiving payments for filing complaints against veteran memorials and military families. A network of corrupt county officials had been expediting Kenneth's complaints in exchange for consulting contracts with his shell companies, creating a criminal conspiracy that reached into local government. Even a local attorney had been drafting fraudulent legal documents to support Kenneth's false federal complaints, creating a criminal conspiracy that involved officers of the court in systematic discrimination against military personnel and their families. My military connections provided access to investigative resources that Kenneth never anticipated. The FBI's domestic terrorism unit was immediately interested when I provided evidence of systematic anti-military harassment affecting multiple states and military installations. The U.S. Attorney's Office assigned a prosecutor who specialized in civil rights violations and had been building cases against anti-military discrimination networks operating near military bases. The Department of Defense Inspector General opened an investigation into security breaches involving military personnel information obtained through Captain Bradshaw's access to classified systems. Most importantly, the Army Criminal Investigation Division began examining Captain Bradshaw's role in providing classified information to support harassment of military families. Kenneth's harassment of one three-star general had triggered investigations by multiple federal agencies and military justice authorities. The surveillance operation I authorized through military intelligence channels revealed Kenneth's activities extended far beyond what I'd witnessed personally. He was conducting reconnaissance of military families' schedules, attempting to coordinate harassment during deployments when families were most vulnerable, and maintaining detailed files on service members' personal information obtained through his son's military access to personnel databases. Kenneth had escalated from property harassment to what military investigators classified as domestic terrorism, targeting military personnel and their families. The most damaging evidence came when military investigators uncovered Kenneth's connections to anti-military extremist groups that specialized in harassment campaigns designed to drive military families from civilian communities through systematic intimidation and legal warfare. The network included individuals with histories of anti-government activities, militia connections, and documented hostility toward military personnel serving in what they considered illegitimate foreign wars. Kenneth's operation was funded by organizations that opposed military presence in civilian communities and sought to isolate military families through systematic harassment disguised as community governance and property value protection. The evidence compilation took 4 months and filled 23 bankers' boxes with documents, recordings, photographs, and digital evidence. The federal grand jury that reviewed the evidence returned indictments against Kenneth and 18 co-conspirators on charges including racketeering, civil rights violations, mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and domestic terrorism related to targeting military personnel and their families. Captain Bradley Bradshaw faced separate military charges including conduct unbecoming an officer, violation of military regulations governing confidentiality and security, conspiracy to commit civil rights violations, and breach of military confidentiality that compromised operational security. The military tribunal would be convened under my direct authority as his commanding general, ensuring that military justice would be swift, thorough, and appropriate to the severity of his betrayal of his oath and his fellow service members. My role in the investigation had to remain confidential until the arrests were completed, which meant continuing to endure Kenneth's harassment, while federal agents and military investigators gathered additional evidence of his criminal enterprise. But every false complaint he filed, every fraudulent document he created, every threatening communication he sent was being monitored and documented by federal authorities who specialized in protecting military families from domestic terrorism and systematic discrimination. Kenneth thought he was wearing down my resistance through persistent anti-military harassment and bureaucratic warfare. What he was actually doing was providing federal prosecutors and military justice authorities with overwhelming evidence for criminal cases that would send him to federal prison while destroying his son's military career and reputation. Some fights are worth everything you have, and protecting military families from systematic discrimination was exactly the battle I'd trained my entire career to win. Kenneth's desperation reached criminal insanity when he decided to escalate from harassment to actual destruction of my father's memorial. And the morning he made that fatal mistake, federal agents and military investigators were already positioned to document every federal crime and military justice violation he committed. It was August 15th, a scorching Tuesday morning with heat waves rising from the asphalt, when Kenneth arrived with a demolition crew, 2 private security guards, and what he claimed was a federal court order authorizing immediate removal of unauthorized military displays that violated national security regulations. The smell of diesel exhaust and jackhammer fuel mixed with his cheap cologne as he stood there in his pink dress shirt and black dress pants. Clipboard pressed against his sweaty chest like a shield, absolutely convinced he'd found the federal authority to destroy my father's Purple Heart Memorial Garden. What Kenneth didn't know was that FBI agents were recording everything from 4 different surveillance positions. Military investigators were documenting violations of federal veterans protection laws. And I was wearing recording equipment that was capturing every word of his confession to multiple federal crimes. The fake federal court order was a masterpiece of criminal forgery, complete with official Department of Veterans Affairs seals, federal judge signatures, and legal citations that would have fooled most property owners into believing they'd lost their rights through legitimate federal authority. Kenneth had obviously invested significant money in creating convincing federal documentation, hiring what appeared to be legitimate demolition contractors, and coordinating what looked like official memorial removal procedures authorized by federal veterans regulations and national security requirements. My military command experience and legal training had taught me to recognize fraudulent federal documents, and Kenneth's forgery was obvious to anyone familiar with actual federal court procedures. The case number didn't match federal court formatting standards. The judge's signature was clearly traced from publicly available documents, and the legal citations referenced veterans protection statutes that actually prohibited exactly the actions Kenneth was attempting to authorize through his fabricated court order. Kenneth had essentially forged a federal court order while simultaneously proving he had no legal authority to destroy military memorials on private property. The demolition crew Kenneth had hired were legitimate professionals who'd been deceived about the nature of their assignment through Kenneth's fraudulent documentation. They'd been told they were removing unauthorized military displays under federal court order and had no idea they were participating in the systematic destruction of a veterans memorial and committing federal crimes. When I calmly explained that the court order was fraudulent and they were being used to commit federal crimes against a military memorial, the crew supervisor immediately ordered his workers to stop. "Sir, if there's any question about the legality, we're not touching military property," he said, backing his equipment away from my father's memorial garden. "We don't destroy veteran memorials for nobody, especially not with fake paperwork." The federal wire I was wearing captured Kenneth's increasingly desperate attempts to maintain control of his failing demolition scheme. "This is a legitimate federal court order," he screamed, his voice rising with panic as the demolition crew retreated. "I have full federal authority to remove unauthorized military displays that violate community standards and national security regulations. If you interfere with federal proceedings, you'll face additional charges for obstruction of justice and interfering with homeland security operations." Every word was being recorded by federal agents, who would later testify that Kenneth had confessed to multiple federal crimes while attempting to destroy a military memorial using forged federal documents. Kenneth's backup plan revealed the true scope of his criminal desperation when he produced what he claimed were Department of Defense orders requiring immediate removal of unauthorized military symbols from civilian communities for national security reasons. The documents, allegedly from the Pentagon and Veterans Administration, ordered immediate cessation of all memorial activities on my property due to federal security concerns and unauthorized use of military imagery that could compromise operational security. Kenneth had forged Department of Defense documents, complete with official letterhead and military seals, creating evidence of federal crimes that carried mandatory minimum sentences of 10 years in federal prison for each forged document. The psychological warfare escalated when Kenneth began making threats that revealed his knowledge of my military position and his son's service under my command. "You think your general's stars will protect you," he said, pointing aggressively while his pink dress shirt stretched across his gut. "But federal veterans regulations and national security override military authority. Your command position doesn't extend to civilian property violations that threaten community safety." Kenneth had just admitted he knew I was a 3-star general, while simultaneously threatening to use fraudulent federal documents to destroy my father's military memorial. The Federal Wire captured Kenneth's detailed knowledge of military command structure, his son's position at Fort Carson, and his belief that civilian authority could override military memorial protections through fabricated federal regulations. The climax came when Kenneth ordered his remaining accomplice, Gerald Morrison, to begin physically removing military symbols from my father's memorial garden using hand tools and a sledgehammer. Gerald, apparently unaware that federal agents were watching from multiple positions, began attempting to dismantle the bronze memorial plaque, while Kenneth supervised with his clipboard and measuring tape, directing which elements to prioritize for destruction. The federal recording equipment captured Kenneth's detailed instructions about which military symbols to destroy first, where to dispose of the memorial elements, and how to document the destruction for his fraudulent federal records. Kenneth was essentially directing the desecration of a military memorial, while federal agents documented every aspect of his criminal enterprise. The federal agents moved in when Kenneth began personally attacking my father's memorial with a sledgehammer, transforming his fraud scheme into actual destruction of federal veterans' property. Special Agent Maria Rodriguez approached Kenneth with her credentials displayed, her voice calm and professional as she explained that he was under federal surveillance for anti-military discrimination and was now being arrested for additional federal crimes committed in the presence of federal agents. The color drained from Kenneth's face as he realized his theatrical memorial destruction had been a federal sting operation designed to catch him committing crimes on camera. Kenneth's arrest was captured on multiple federal recording devices as agents documented every aspect of his criminal operation. His pink dress shirt was soaked with sweat as Agent Rodriguez read him his rights while other agents photographed the forged federal documents, secured the damaged memorial property, and arrested Gerald Morrison for participating in federal destruction of military memorials. The federal investigation expanded dramatically when agents discovered Kenneth's storage unit, containing military property stolen from other veteran families through identical fraud schemes. Memorial plaques, military flags, Bronze Star medals, Purple Heart awards, and personal military memorabilia from at least 12 other military families were found in Kenneth's storage facilities, revealing that his harassment of me was part of a systematic criminal enterprise that had been stealing military honors and destroying veteran memorials for over 4 years. Kenneth hadn't just been harassing one 3-star general. He'd been running a criminal organization that specialized in desecrating military memorials and stealing veteran honors across multiple Western states. The money trail revealed Kenneth's operation had destroyed over $280,000 worth of military memorials and stolen honors, all of which was subject to federal forfeiture under anti-military terrorism statutes. Captain Bradley Bradshaw was arrested simultaneously at Fort Carson by military police acting under my direct command authority. The military charges included conduct unbecoming an officer, conspiracy to violate federal veterans protection laws, breach of military confidentiality, and complicity in destruction of military memorials. Bradley's military career was over. His commission would be stripped, and he faced federal criminal charges for participating in his father's anti-military terrorism. The federal grand jury that had been investigating Kenneth's activities returned a superseding indictment with 71 federal charges, including domestic terrorism targeting military personnel, systematic destruction of military memorials, racketeering, mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and civil rights violations. The indictment named Kenneth as the leader of a criminal organization that had operated across 8 Western states, destroyed memorials honoring over 60 veterans, and generated. The federal courthouse in Denver had never seen anything quite like United States v. Kenneth Bradshaw and Associates, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone that Kenneth would be facing sentencing for anti-military terrorism, while his son faced military tribunal proceedings for betraying his oath of office to fellow service members. The courtroom was packed with veterans, active duty military personnel, Gold Star families, and federal agents who'd come to witness what prosecutors called the most comprehensive anti-military discrimination prosecution in federal court history. Kenneth sat at the defendant's table in his orange prison jumpsuit, his pink dress shirt and black dress pants replaced by federal detention clothing, looking like a deflated balloon as he faced the consequences of targeting the wrong 3-star general with his systematic campaign against military families. I'd maintained my role as commanding general throughout the investigation, but federal sentencing guidelines and victim impact procedures required my testimony about the scope of his criminal activities and their impact on military personnel and veterans' families. Chief Judge Robert Harrison, himself a Vietnam veteran who understood the sacred nature of military memorials, would be handling Kenneth's sentencing with the kind of judicial precision that makes federal sentences educational experiences for domestic terrorists. The smell of furniture polish and military bearing filled the courtroom as Kenneth's attorney, an overworked public defender named James Martinez, prepared to argue for mercy in a case where mercy would be both inappropriate and insulting to every veteran Kenneth had victimized. The evidence presentation took 6 days and filled the court record with overwhelming documentation of Kenneth's anti-military criminal enterprise. Federal prosecutors presented 347 pieces of evidence, including the wire recordings of Kenneth confessing to federal crimes while attempting to destroy my father's memorial, photographs of his forged federal documents, financial records showing $380, $0 in stolen military honors and destroyed memorials, and testimony from 43 military families who'd been targeted by Kenneth's systematic harassment campaigns. The scope of his criminal organization was staggering, involving corrupt officials in 8 states, fraudulent legal documents, and a sophisticated network designed specifically to drive military families from civilian communities through systematic intimidation, disguised as community governance and property value protection. My victim impact testimony provided the court with detailed analysis of Kenneth's criminal methods and their broader implications for military family security and veterans' memorial protection. Your Honor, I began, addressing Judge Harrison while Kenneth squirmed in his seat, my 3 stars visible on my dress uniform. The defendant didn't just attempt to destroy my father's Purple Heart Memorial through fraud and intimidation. He systematically undermined military family welfare by targeting service members with criminal harassment, designed to punish them for their military service and sacrifice. His actions represent domestic terrorism, specifically targeting military personnel, and his criminal organization poses ongoing threats to military family security throughout the western United States. The financial destruction was swift and comprehensive, as federal forfeiture proceedings seized every asset Kenneth had acquired through criminal activity. His Mountain Vista Estates mansion, valued at $1 million, was forfeited to compensate victims of his anti-military harassment schemes. His luxury vehicles, boats, investment accounts, and business interests were liquidated to fund memorial restoration and restitution payments to the 43 military families he'd victimized through systematic discrimination and theft. Kenneth's entire lifestyle, built on anti-military hatred and criminal proceeds, was dismantled by federal agents who specialized in recovering assets from domestic terrorism operations. Kenneth's co-conspirators faced their own federal justice as the criminal organization he'd built collapsed under federal prosecution. Gerald Morrison received 15 years for conspiracy and destruction of military property, his insurance executive pension forfeited to pay veteran restitution. Sandra Phillips, who'd participated in surveillance of military families, received 12 years for civil rights violations and anti-military harassment. The corrupt county officials who'd been expediting Kenneth's fraudulent complaints received sentences ranging from 8 to 18 years for systematic discrimination against military personnel. Kenneth's anti-military network was systematically destroyed by federal prosecutors who specialized in dismantling domestic terrorism operations targeting military communities. The military tribunal proceedings against Captain Bradley Bradshaw were conducted under my direct authority as his commanding general, and the military justice was swift and thorough. Bradley faced court-martial for conduct unbecoming an officer, conspiracy to violate federal military protection laws, breach of military confidentiality, and complicity in systematic harassment of military families under his protection through his father's criminal enterprise. The military evidence revealed Bradley had provided his father with confidential information about over 70 military families, including deployment schedules, family emergency contacts, and service-connected disability information that Kenneth used to target harassment when military personnel were most vulnerable. Bradley's betrayal of his oath of office was complete and unforgivable, representing the worst possible violation of military honor and brotherhood. The court-martial verdict was unanimous, guilty on all charges. Bradley was sentenced to dismissal from service, forfeiture of all military benefits, reduction to the lowest enlisted rank, and federal criminal prosecution for violating military confidentiality laws and participating in domestic terrorism against military families. His military career was destroyed, his commission stripped, and his name would forever be associated with betraying the military families he'd sworn to protect. Judge Harrison's sentencing remarks became legendary in federal court circles for their comprehensive destruction of Kenneth's character and criminal enterprise. "Mr. Bradshaw," he said, looking directly at Kenneth as he sat trembling in his orange jumpsuit, "you have systematically victimized military families through a criminal organization that specialized in anti-military terrorism disguised as community governance. Your destruction of veteran memorials represents an attack on military service that threatens the foundation of our national defense and the sacred trust between our nation and those who serve." The sentence was devastating and final: 31 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, followed by 15 years of supervised probation with restrictions on community association activities, contact with military personnel, and residence near military installations. Kenneth would be 86 years old before his release, and federal probation conditions would prevent him from ever again living in communities with military families. The civil judgment was equally comprehensive as federal court awarded $5.2 million in damages for civil rights violations, destruction of military property, and systematic anti-military harassment. The judgment included punitive damages designed to deter similar criminal activities and compensate military families for years of harassment, destroyed memorials, and stolen military honors caused by Kenneth's criminal organization. The legislative impact of Kenneth's case extended far beyond individual justice, as Congress passed the Military Family Protection Act, strengthening penalties for systematic harassment of military personnel and creating federal oversight of community associations in military areas. The Harrison Amendment, named in recognition of my father's service and my family's battle to protect his memorial, established federal criminal penalties for destruction of military memorials and systematic discrimination against military families. My father's memorial garden was restored using funds seized from Kenneth's criminal enterprise, and I established the Master Sergeant Robert Harrison Foundation to provide legal assistance to military families facing systematic harassment from anti-military discrimination. The foundation has helped over 400 military families fight back against criminal harassment schemes, using Kenneth's case as a blueprint for federal prosecution of anti-military terrorism. The annual Military Memorial Protection Day celebration at my father's memorial draws military families from across Colorado who have successfully defended their rights against anti-military harassment. Children play among the restored memorial gardens where Kenneth once stood with his fake federal court orders, their laughter echoing across grounds that honor the sacrifice of those who served. Kenneth's story became a cautionary tale taught in military justice training programs about the consequences of targeting military families and the importance of protecting military personnel from domestic terrorism. His systematic harassment of one three-star general triggered the largest anti-military discrimination investigation in federal court history, destroyed a criminal organization operating across 8 states, and resulted in